If you want to make very simple interactions with a GUI using Unity, you can use a GUI texture. Moving on from this, you'd use code to create a menu, but to create something simple, you can simply use a graphic file you've created in Photoshop. In this example, I've created two files in Photoshop. A normal button, which looks like this, and a hover for the same button, which looks like this. I've saved them as two separate files in my asset folder and created a separate folder called GUI. To add them as a GUI texture, a 2D texture that will be overlaid on the screen, I simply select the texture that I want to look as the default and then go to Game Object, Create Other, GUI Texture. This uses the texture to create a new object with a transform and a GUI texture component. If you add the GUI texture component without selecting the object first, you'll have to fill in the pixel inset and width and height settings yourself. The advantage of doing it that way means that we can now write a script that will swap that for something else and thus create a simple button. You can also move the position of these things around using the X and Y position in transform. But bear in mind these are in screen coordinates rather than world coordinates. So 0 is bottom left and 1 is top right. So if I wanted to just move that left and down slightly, I'd change 0.5 to 0.3. So let's see how we can interact with that with the mouse. If I go ahead and create a new JavaScript, and I'll call this mouse click button, for example, and hit edit. I don't need the update function, so I'm going to lose that straight away. What I'm going to do is put in two variables, one for the normal texture of the button, so I'm going to call that normal text, and data type that to texture 2D. So bear in mind, whenever you put a graphic file in, it's always referred to as a texture. We're using these specifically for 2D, so I'm data typing them to texture 2D rather than texture. So the first mouse function we might look at is on mouse enter. Now you can use these on a GUI element, and you can also use them on a collider. So you could use this to select if you were clicking on a model. We just happen to be using it in an example using a 2D GUI element. So into that, what I might say is when the mouse enters, I might say that the GUI texture component has a different texture by addressing its texture variable. And I'll say set it equal to whatever texture I've applied to my hover text variable at the top. So these two are member variables, so they're going to appear in the inspector. So if I save that script, switch back to Unity, and I'm going to drag this and drop it onto my new button. I'm also going to rename this, I'll call it play button, because when you create it, it takes the name of the texture that you selected first. So now I've added that script as a component. You can see that I've got normal text and hover text, and I need to assign those. So I know what those are. That's my default look and my mouse over look. So those two different files are what I'm going to assign there. So that's that one and that one. So clicking back on my play button, I'm going to go back into the script, and at the moment I've only got a mouse enter. So if I wanted to add a mouse exit, I would need to add that as a separate function, because at the moment if I just test it and press play and move my mouse over that, it changes, but when I move away again, there's nothing in the script to tell it to change back. So I need to also include a mouse exit function. So I'm going to say function on mouse exit, one way around, and I'm going to use the same command, this time swapping it back. So I'm going to be a bit lazy and copy paste that in, and I'm going to say normal text is what it's going to swap back to, so I can save that. So now if I save that, switch back to Unity, when I play the game, I can hover over that and move out, and I can see that it's swapping the texture for that object. Then what I'm going to do is just make sure that I can actually click on it and create some kind of function call. So I'm going to actually go back into my script now, and put in one last mouse function. So I'm going to say on mouse down this time. So I want to create an actual piece of functionality that I can use this button for. Currently it doesn't do anything apart from change to a different texture. So just to illustrate this, rather than actually taking you through making it do anything in particular, I'm going to just say debug.log, and I'm going to say clicked button. So if I save that, switch back to Unity and press play, now when I hover over the button and click, you can see that down at the bottom here it says clicked button. And if I click that a few times and look at the console, you can see that it's calling that every time. So you'd simply pass in some kind of call into the mouse down function in order to perform any particular function that you wanted. So for example, if this was an actual menu, you might want to use application.loadLevel, for example, to move to a different scene and start the game. Or you might simply want to use it to destroy the menu and invoke some kind of control script so you can start playing the game. So just a few examples of how to use a GUI texture and some simple mouse functions on those. Bear in mind that it is often better to use proper GUI scripting, and we'll cover those in a different tutorial.